Right. Hey, I want to say something nice about you before you're allowed to speak.
Okay.
That's one of the rules. I'm going to give a plug for your book. The Red Atlas, How the Soviet Union Secretly Mapped the World. Says it all, doesn't it, really? And I would also heartily recommend to you John's website, www.sovietmaps.com. Other than that, it's a fascinating and well-known topic, and you do have an authority on it before you. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Let's see the first picture. Okay, the two maps, these two maps of central London, they happen to be the same scale and they're the same date, both 1 to 25,000, both 1985. So they make a very interesting comparison. And the one on the right is the Ordnance Survey map. And of course, we Brits like to think that the Ordnance Survey is the gold standard in cartography and map making. But when you compare it with what the Soviet map shows, the Soviet map on the left is it's a military map, it's secret, it's produced during the Cold War by the military topographic unit of the General Staff of the Red Army. And they've not only collected a huge amount of information about central London, but portrayed it on the map, depicted things on the map brilliantly. So they show far more information than the Ordnance Survey shows, and they show it in a form that's very easily assimilated, very easy to understand. Once you've learnt their conventions, their symbology, their colouring, then you can interpret that map brilliantly. And I'll just tell you some of the things that are on the map, and then we'll think about the map more widely. But for example, on the lower side of the map, we see the River Thames. The name is in uppercase, so that tells us immediately that it's a navigable river. Just south of that, there's two arrows. One arrow tells us that it's a tidal river. The other one shows us the direction of the flow of the river. You'll notice that the streets are named, which they're not on the Ordnance Survey. You'll notice the footprints of the buildings are shown correctly, which they're not on the Ordnance Survey, they're generalized. You'll notice there's where the arrow just is hovering now, you'll see a road tunnel linking Waterloo Bridge with Kingsway. That's not shown on the Ordnance Survey map. You'll notice tube stations, there we are, the little letter M for metro shows tube stations, and they're named. Again, they're not on the Ordnance Survey map. And intriguingly also, you notice the purple number 248, there's a black lower down number 28, and a green just off the edge of the picture down at the bottom left-hand corner. So what the map makers do is identify a number of what's known as important objects. They're color-coded on the map, purple for governmental or administration, black for industrial, green for military significance. So these particular items are color-coded on the map, they're numbered, they're listed on an accompanying index. So that illustration, I think, just shows you how meticulous the map makers are and how brilliantly they convey the information cartographically. So the London map, it's 1 to 25,000. It's in 4 sheets covering the whole of the Greater London area. And it's called, it's part of a series known as city maps or city plans. If we look at the next slide, this is a tip. So city plans, there are about 2,000, more than 2,000 worldwide city plans, around about 100 of them in the UK, similar number in the US, and the rest in the rest of Europe and the rest of the world. They're all either 1 to 10,000 or 1 to 25,000. They're all created during the Cold War period of the 1960s up to the 1990. And a very typical one is this one. Chester is a small city in the north of England. And the map there, you see it on the left, the entirety of the map. And I've shown it like that because it shows you, first of all, it captures at a glance, you see the extent of the city, you see the surrounding countryside, you can see the nature of the terrain, the colouring tells you where the buildings are, the colouring and tells you where the industry is. And the style of the map is very fixed style of map. On the top of the map is always the name of the city, in this case Chester, accompanied by a code. In the case of Chester, the code is N30103. So that coding is from the International Map of the World Symbology, but it tells you at a glance where in the world this map is. So any Russian officer could pick up this map and he would instantly know where in the world this place is. The place names are all, we'll come to place names later. Let's just talk about the rest of this map. The marginalia is fascinating because the top right-hand corner, there's list I mentioned on the London map. We saw important objects. So in Chester, there are 24 important objects. They're listed and named where they possibly can. They'll name the factory or they'll name the product of the factory. Sometimes they put a little asterisk saying we don't actually know, production unknown. But all the important civil buildings, all the important infrastructure, industry, transportation is all there. It's listed, numbered, and color-coded on the map. Below the index is a street index. That long thing down the center of the right-hand side is a street index. And then the panel at the bottom is a description. It's called Spravka in Russian, and it's a written essay. It's a description of typically 2,500 words, describing in a very stylized format everything we need to know about this city, about the terrain, about the climate, about the topography, about the nature of the industry, the communications, and the people, the ethnicity of the people. Fascinating collection of information. So these maps convey or tell us that there was a vast amount of research done during this period and beautifully created onto these magnificent maps. And it wasn't a one-off project. Many of the cities in Britain will have a map dated, say, the 1950s, and another map in the 1960s or the 1970s. So they repeatedly went round revising these maps and reprinting them. The next slide, if we can go to the next slide, the city plans were only one part of the story. The city plans are rectangular, based on a local meridian, but alongside them, there's a series of maps called the topographic maps, the topos, and these are continuous and they're not rectangular. The sides of these maps are dictated by lines of longitude, so they're not, so they taper towards the north. And these topo sheets are of 5 scales, 1 to 1 million, 1 to 500,000, 1 to 200,000, 1 to 100,000, and 1 to 50,000. Now, they didn't necessarily cover the entire land surface of the world at all scales, but certainly those smaller scales, the whole of the Americas, the whole of Europe and the Asia, everywhere was done up to 200,000. And certainly Britain and much of Europe at 100,000 and 50,000. The smaller scales you might consider as strategic planning maps. And then they get to the larger scales, which you call tactical maps. And I've chosen to show you the 200,000 because this is quite an interesting one. So the map has, well, you can see the size of the map on the right there. It's maybe about 0.5 meter by 0.5 meter, 500 millimeters in each way. So very convenient size of piece of paper to be handling. Shows a significant map part of southeast England. So as a planning map, as a traversing, or the going as the militia would call it, how to traverse the country, it's a very useful scale. You'll see topography, but we see the ways of traveling particularly. When we look at the detail, this little detailed excerpt I've shown you on the right, you'll see overprinted in purple the kind of information you need for traveling, which is distances between marked points on the highway. And then these annotated, the 1024 by 36 over 100, that's showing us, that's annotating a bridge. So it says the bridge is of reinforced concrete, and there's the length and the width of the bridge and the carrying capacity. And you'll see a second such bridge just to the right of it. And also on here, you'll see that the motorway is named E107. It's named the M2, which we would know it as the M2, but they're also showing the European road number, which they're never used on British maps. But that shows us that this is very much part of an international project. There's the the E107 number. And the place names are all rendered transliterated so that the correct pronunciation is shown in Cyrillic. So a Russian speaker will pick up these maps, and for all the weird pronunciations there are of British place names or Welsh or Irish or any other nationality of place names, a Russian speaker will be able to pick up one of these maps and correctly pronounce the names. It wouldn't be much use if he was looking at a road sign, but he can ask the locals. So I think these maps are a magnificent indication of what the Russians were capable of doing. And it just begs the question, why, if you were planning to blow the whole place up, why bother making such magnificent detailed maps of it? That's my story. Thank you.
Well, if I need to get my T55 to Liverpool, I now know how to do so.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much indeed, John. The questions have been flowing thick and fast while you've been speaking.
Okay.
This has got our curiosity bump, I think. I think we need to make the promise that we'll be utterly done by 8:30.
Okay.
For everybody's sake. And please don't feel you have to stay if you've got other things to do. But there's some good questions here. Number one, easy one. They get harder, by the way. And then you get more money, the better you answer the question.
I'm on here for the money, yeah.
Okay, you ready? Does the London map show hidden or disused underground stations?
It shows what they knew. And intriguingly, I'll just divert from the question slightly, because the London map is accompanied by a geographical diagram of the tube network. Now, that's very unfamiliar to Londoners. We all know the familiar Beck stylized diagram, but the Russians didn't use that. They've used a geographic map, and they've very carefully differentiated between what's part of the tube network and what's part of the rest of the rail network. So they're marked separately on the maps. But the disused or hidden, I don't really know the answer to that question.
Yeah, you'd have to take an example, maybe. You'd have to take an example. There's that one down by the embankment.
Aldwych tube station is shown.
That's what I'm thinking of, yeah.
Yeah, that's shown there, but then I don't know if that existed in 1985. I can't remember when it was closed.
Okay.
But they didn't show ones that were closed a lot earlier, like British Museum or something.
Yeah. Well, that actually takes me on to the next question, because clearly they did have a plan to use it, and so the question is about the purpose of it.
Yeah, well, I'm very much
or government after conquest.
Yeah, I would say that the purpose of these maps is to take control. They're very much showing you what you need to know if you're going to run the city. So they're not hostile. Well, they're hostile in the sense that, yeah, they would like to come and run the place, but they're not hostile in the sense of this is what we're planning to bomb. They're not planning to flatten the place.
Clearly not, yeah.
They're planning to take over, and you need to know. These maps show and indicate the bus stations, the post offices, the civil facilities, the infrastructure that you need to run the place, not what you need to bomb to disable the place.
So really, when the workers' paradise was declared, rather than
exactly, yeah.
But it takes me to very nicely the next question, which was, how do you think they obtained that level of detail?
By many different ways, and one of the main reasons or the purposes of the book is to look at the evidence on the map and like reverse engineering or detective work. Where could this piece of information come from? They've come, clearly some of it has come from Ordnance Survey maps, but clearly not all of it. And what they've used are trade directories, they've used A to Z street atlases, they've used satellite surveillance, because quite often there's things shown on these maps later than any British maps. So, you know, there's roads under construction, there's mistakes that indicate something that's been going on. One of the maps of the north of England shows a long lateral a linear excavation, which they've marked as being a road under construction. It isn't, it's a pipeline under construction. So that tells us that was misunderstood satellite imagery.
Great.
So the details come from anything they could possibly get their hands on, and possibly from friendship exchange visits. You know, trade unions, teachers would visit Soviet Union, they would visit here. And I'm sure people inadvertently provided a lot of information about where they worked, what the factory made, what was going on in the town at the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we very much appreciate you hanging on to the last spot, because we've made you work harder. There was one final question. Do you think these maps were made for espionage?
For
espionage? Is there any evidence?
Well, they're made by espionage for control. The purpose of the maps isn't espionage.
Yeah, it was covertly designed. Yeah.
But yeah, very much. I mean, very many different sources, and were they made by? Were the boots on the ground involved? Did spies or others, agents, tour around collecting information? And to some extent, the answer is yes. There are some of those bridge annotations where they're showing the clearance under the bridge or the bridge construction. Probably people on the ground collected that information. You know, maybe diplomats from the embassy would be touring and collecting information. So there would be some on the ground surveillance, yeah.
Mm. Well, that's interesting, isn't it, really? But it was everywhere. It wasn't just the UK, it wasn't just the United States. It was anywhere that they could do so.
Anywhere you could get the information, and Europe extensively, yes. Yeah. And the States, the maps of the States are just as detailed and just as fascinating.
Thank you.